Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the gathering. I am David Ault. It's a beautiful spring day here in Atlanta, Georgia. Yesterday was the birthday, the arrival of the soul that we know as Ram Dass. On our mantle in our living room space, there is a picture of him that we keep there. And it usually has a candle lit. It has some flowers around it because he has been very pivotal, not only in my life personally, but particularly in the life of my partner, J. Ram Lentini. In fact, his name, J. Ram, was given to him by Ram Dass years ago on a summer solstice evening after having spent many years with him. And I think about the honor that my partner had to be able to have that one-on-one time with him. I think about the great lengths that my partner went to travel there and to make that a priority in his life. And then to see the harvest. I'm the benefit of the harvest that he has reaped from that complete upending and transformation within his own way of viewing and being in the world. Really, really remarkable. And we often marvel about the fact that I was sort of a closeted Ram Dass fan, reading his books, devouring his books, and finding that I resonated with him because not only did I consider him to be a pivotal wisdom teacher, but he was humble about it. And whenever his ego or his inflated sense of self ever got into the way, which it did, he always called himself out on it. And that was the thing that really drew me to him, that he had this ability to walk the earth again in this amazing incarnation, have so much uh, variety within his life experience and still maintain that balance, that humbleness, and that elevated sense of wisdom within him. And so I loved him very, very much. And I loved his writing very much. And I often used many of his teachings in so many different ways in my field of spiritual development. So yesterday was his birthday. And we lit our candles. And every time I concentrate on him or celebrate him in any way, I go back to the same thing. And it is a private message that he shared to my partner, Jay Ram, in one of their final meetings in one of the last years of Ram Dass's life. So Jay Ram would travel to Maui, and I mean, he thought he was going there one time to go to this retreat, and that one retreat so changed his being that he vowed that he would go back as often as possible. And Ram Dass, in these later years, made it available that you could come. You could come and even stay at the conclave, at the house that he lived in, where the caretakers were, because as you may be aware, he had been suffering from the stroke almost 20 years of the last 20 years of his life. And so he had caretakers and there was a routine, but you had the ability to come and have this long, concentrated time. And J-Ram just poured everything, every resource, every available vacation hour to go and to sit at his feet and to be with him in that manner. And again, what a beautiful blessing. And so in one of those final meetings, he said to J. Ram this statement, and we talk about this a lot because there's far more to it than just what you will hear immediately. He said to him, um, beware the ego masquerading as spirit. Beware the ego masquerading as spirit. And the way that J. Ram tells it is that he was saying it to him, and to his own personhood. Beware that when you feel as though you are having these insights, that you don't muddy the purity of that wisdom or that connection by then inflating it with some sort of superiority. Don't see yourself or fall into the trap of separateness. Beware the ego masquerading as spirit. And we talk about that a lot because not only is it a repetitive learning lesson for myself and for him, but for humanity. And as I was doing my own private devotions and thanking him in this little ceremony yesterday, as I stare at our mantle in the living space, I thought about that and I began to sort of take that even deeper. So, first of all, the word ego, we use that, we say that a lot. And oftentimes, I don't know if we really kind of stop and I'll say differentiate between the nuanced meaning of that. So there is this ego for me, basically simple, is anything that promotes separation. So that definition of the ego is that thing to be aware of. Beware of that. The ego, the thing that tells us that anything is separate from ourselves. Um, but there is also that which is the ego, which is, we could say, needed or in part of the instructional packet of coming and being a human. So the ego is the part that breaks down our identities. And you sort of need an identity to first begin your walking through this experience as being a human. You're someone's child, you're a part of this community or this culture or this economic bracket or this religion. You use those things to sort of formulate yourself and get a grip in the world. But the trick to that ego is that we forget that it's just a form. It's just sort of a costume that we have been given to walk through being human. And so we forget that, and now we think that we are the costume. And when we forget that we are the costume, then the ego is the thing that promotes this sense of separation. And so you start to see something that is actually helpful in getting us going in being human also then devolves into this thing that tells us or blares at us a false doctrine that tells us that we are the costume instead of the fact that we are wearing a costume. And so beware the ego, beware the devolvement of this idea of separation that is masquerading as spirit. So masquerading. What is the word masquerading? If you look at the etymology, I think it goes back to the French origin or derivative, and it's mostly a mask. It's a false identity. When we use it today, it has something to do with a false show or a pretense, pretending to be someone or something that you and I aren't. And so people, I think, can do that, engage in masquerading themselves purposefully, intentionally, in order to get something, or life itself, this costume that are wearing is a form of a masquerade ball, and we are unaware that that's what it is. We are attending a masquerade. We are participating in the masquerade, and we have long forgotten somehow. We have covered ourselves with the illusion or the dream state in forgetting that what we are participating in is actually a false thing. It's a dream. It's a masquerade. I'm thinking of that song, "We're Lost in the Masquerade." And so beware the ego, beware the thought pattern, beware the belief systems that not only promote separation, but then that separation is being masqueraded as spirit or titles or authoritarian or better than or false pretense. So when you think about that, Ram Dass was telling Jai Ram, beware of that within yourself. Notice that as you continue to get looped back into the forgetfulness that you're wearing a costume, and just continue to um, disrobe or separate your sense of being from the costume that you are wearing. Wake up, reawaken to the authenticity and the truth of your being. And I thought that that was worthy of discussion and review because I find that I forget that I'm in a masquerade ball many times during the day. I just like something will grab me. There have been issues overseas with some of our programs, and I'll get caught in the catalyst of that. I will take personally something, or I will critique something, or I will feel sad about something. And I think all of those things will be real and maybe perhaps threatening to the costume or threatening to the ego or fuel for the ego or the sense of separation with regards to those things. And so when we can now talk about that and define that, then what is or what becomes the invitation to the solution? What becomes the practice? What becomes the thing that helps us remove or take off the mask? And I wish that there was a one size fits all for that. And what I come up with and what I share with you isn't new. It isn't revelatory. But what's interesting about these suggestions is that even though they're not new, and even though they might have some empirical evidence of good, we still fail to embody them. We still fail to have some kind of a devotion to the apparatus or the things that help us take off the costume. And first and foremost is stillness. And so oftentimes that feels too general. Like I say, getting still, getting quiet. Okay. But what is a way to do that, you ask? So here's one that worked this week for me. Something was irritating. There was a miscommunication, culturally, language wise. Again, sort of a repeated pattern that was very frustrating. And I went back to a practice. It's a form of stillness where I waited 24 hours to respond. Like there was an immediate irritation. There was immediate thing that wanted to be reactive. And I used to do this with great regularity. And sometimes I forget. Sometimes I must beware of the ego masquerading as the spirit of superiority or I'm right. And that is to breathe and pause and not react, to give it 24 hours, sometimes maybe even longer. And you will notice, I tell you this with full belief. You will notice the dissipation of the heat, the dissipation of the reactivity within you. And you will begin to see very humblingly your falsification, your mistake, your misperception of something. You will see that it filtered or you heard it through a particular lens that was only relevant for you, but not necessarily relevant for the situation. So, what are the things that help us continue to remove the mask, to understand that we are in a masquerade ball? is to breathe, breathe, become still, give yourself uh, a, uh, a 24-hour go in the corner stillness and not respond and just watch. It's almost like a cleansing. Watch as if someone has turned the shower on and you are going in repeatedly and rinsing off that reactivity. It's a beautiful thing. And it's humbling. It's humbling to realize, I didn't hear it from this perspective, or I heard it through this lens, or wow, that's just an old trigger that keeps repeating itself in me. It's the thing that I lead with, for example, rather than being able to receive something without having it go through that reactivity. And this is the way we learn. This is the way that we become more and more aware that we are not the costume. We are not the form. And if we're not that, then what are we? Well, every spiritual principle tells us repeatedly that we are a part of that which is God or infinite intelligence or source. Even biblically, it says, I and the Father are one. There is no other. There, in the ego definition, there is no separation. There is no other. There is only one thing taking place. And it becomes our, I'm not even going to say that it becomes our mission. It is inherent. It is the thing that draws us. It's sort of the irritant. It's the thorn that is in there that wants to be extracted. And that irritant perpetuates itself. And sometimes instead of removing the thorn, we build lives around protecting the thorn. And yet the thorn will remain there until awareness arrives at a pivotal point that we go, oh, let me remove the thorn. Let me take off the costume. Let me stop self-identifying. And so stillness, stillness, taking a 24-hour breather, practice that, practice that. The other thing that we share in common a great deal now, and I will say is unique to this era in time, is something called social media, which I'm pretty sure we're all a part of, and the reactivity that happens within that, and also how we must beware the ego masquerading as spirit. There's lots of people out there posting, writing, sharing things that have a sense of, I know what's best, um, and are very, very staunch in that. And if we are very trepidatious and if we are still very much struggling with the masquerade and the costumes that we were wearing, we will find all kinds of things to gravitate to that will support whatever this present identity that we are encased in is. We will find something that will be of agreement with a particular belief, and that does not mean that it's true. Beware. Beware the ego masquerading as this voice of authority, as if, beware the ego masquerading as justifications of why I must maintain my costume. Beware of the ego masquerading as people who must explain why their costume is valid. And if you can begin to see it through this lens, if you can begin to go, okay, I'm going to log on, and I'm also going to know that I'm in a masquerade ball, that I am in a sea of people wearing masks. Use it, use it as an exercise. Don't respond and go on there and say, hey, you're delusional. You're in a masquerade ball. It's not the point. The point is to use it as an exercise and begin to see the themes, begin to see the need, begin to see the suffering, begin to see the thorns, Begin to notice the languaging and the repetition and the earnestness, even in this the spirit, the ego masquerading as spirit. And again, then catch yourself. Watch yourself go, oh, I know better, because now you are on the same side of the coin as the thing that you are judging. It's very humbling. It's very powerful to look at and to realize that everything is mirroring back to us what it is that we are judging. Everything is mirroring back to that which is taking on a position that is in agreement with our ego state. All of that, all of that from one little statement. There's so much there. And so when we begin to, I'll use the dirty word, take responsibility, we come to realize that this thing called healing is the process of uncostuming. Healing is the process of taking off not just one mask, but the multitude of masks that we have sewn on, glued on, and in fact, will go through many lifetimes never taking them off. Healing is all of these processes, and it is taking responsibility for the role that we have personally played in our own suffering. Let me tell you that again. Healing is this process of taking responsibility for the sleepwalking and the remaining in the roles that have played and promoted our own suffering. Oftentimes, in the role of the ego, we're still very much hooked in placing that responsibility on a memory, on a person, on an organization, or an event. And even though there is relativity in the realness of that, it is not a prison. And one must beware of the ego masquerading as this spirited authority that finger points and blames. And we would go back and we say, again, David, how do I work at what is the practice that I can continue to reawaken from this illusion? Stillness, stillness, stillness. And the second thing is, again, environment. Environment. There are two types of environment. One is we are products of an environment in the masquerade. So we cannot help but absorb or be sponge-like in taking on all of the characteristics of everybody who is in the masquerade ball. It's just the way that it works. But there is also a product of an environment, which is the essential self or the true self, that which is not bound by the costume, that which is, as Ram Dass would say, loving awareness. That we are also a product, we are the product, we are that. We are that environment of the complete absorption of being loving awareness is also there. So you've got competing environments. You've got the product of the environment from the masquerade ball, and you've got the inherent product of the environment of the essential self or the true nature. And our only reason for doing this, our only reason for accepting the ticket to go into the masquerade ball is to wake up and become aware that it's a masquerade ball. And thirdly, stillness, environment. You have things that you can help support that environment. You have the ability to turn things off. You have the ability to find those wisdom keepers or those situations or those places or those practices that support the reawakening. And then thirdly, that third piece is being in the world, but not of it. Being in the masquerade ball, but not forgetting that you're in the masquerade ball. And I present that to you as this final piece with regards to your participation in the world. You might call it your advocacy. You might call the way in which you choose to express your creativity or your resources. So when we begin to see the perpetual ongoing disenfranchisement that takes place within the masquerade, we can get very, very lost, even if we might have a great grounded sense of everything that we've talked about previously. We'll get pulled in and we will begin to feel that this world, this masquerade ball, is a hopeless situation, or that we might throw our hands up and give up and live in a sort of quiet desperation, even though intellectually we've studied all of these other concepts, we've even practiced them, but somehow the masquerade keeps overwhelming us. And what I say to that is, think about that as your one true assignment. Yes, we all have to kind of jolt ourselves and wake up to this idea of loving awareness. We have to reawaken. We have to extricate ourselves, move off these veils, if you will. We have to shake ourselves. And many things are supporting us to get to that point. But now the pivotal piece is we must live in it. You must continue to dress up, dress the costume, show up, participate in those things. But I want you to see how you can do such things, how you can be in the world. But suddenly, the way in which you are moving is in a sense of awareness that does not get so easily dragged down into the forgetfulness, into the despair, even, dare I say, into the seduction of thinking that you are the thing, the ego, the savior, the superiority, the figurehead, getting checked by those things with regularity and beginning to see that the only responsibility and the only end game, if you will, in this incarnation is to do all that we can to not only be examples, but to help others to lift them out of any type of suffering. Again, not from some grandiose platform, but to keep doing so in a way that we are reminded ourselves. And to also hold this paradox in mind as well, that sometimes the people that we think that we are helping or lifting out of separation are actually helping us. They're helping us practice this by playing their own masquerade role. Everything is not as it seems. There's a constant humbling check, a constant humbling check to go, wait a minute, why are you holding on to that? Wait a minute, what is that misperception? Wait a minute, what is that little sneaky sense of uh, superiority, that authority that wants to come in that isn't appropriate? And begin to be humbled every single day by the extraordinary mystery of the masquerade. And at the same time, feed the person that's hungry. Try to educate the one who is seemingly illiterate but eager to learn. No forcing, no manipulating, no power grabbing, no ego inflating, no masquerading these acts in order to remove us from our old stale masks of unworthiness. Oh my God, so much manipulative behavior within the masquerade ball. Just be humble and be willing to see our part. Take that responsibility, but by all means, be involved. Because to be involved is a requirement or a prerequisite to evolve. One must be involved to evolve. And there, my friend, I believe, is helpful things that will teach all of us to remember and to see one another and to support one another and to love one another. Blessings.